Welcome back. Today we're going to cut a few 8x8 posts for the basement. This will support the beams that'll ultimately be the framework for the subfloor. I thought you might want to get a look at the sawmill operation here. This whole area was cleared and stripped of trees and bulldozed down to flat. But it was actually done after I had the sawmill in place here. All of this property is pretty sloped, and I was able to find a level enough spot to set up the sawmill initially. And then once we got a bulldozer in here, we kind of bulldozed around it to a point of level. Off to the right, there's a pretty significant drop on the hill there where we pushed a lot of the brush from where we cleared the trees. I used a lot of these trees that we cut down from this area. They're actually stacked up in logs behind the camera there, and I'm going to be using them for ultimately either flooring or cladding. The majority of the trees that you see and all of the trees that were in this space are white oak. So very strong trees, but not big trees, mostly around anywhere from 10 to 14 inches in diameter at the most. So for the most part, it gets me a good supply of finish wood and wood for furniture and other things that I'll do. This is pine. We do have some pine trees on the property, but they're few and far between. Really just kind of occasional random pines through the property. But this particular one had been leaning over the creek, and it was going to definitely fall at some point anyway, so I wanted to take advantage of it. I was able to get about 5 10-foot lengths of log out of this particular tree, and so now we're cutting them down into 8x8s. I went with a LX55 Woodmizer sawmill. There's an LX25. I went with the 55 just because it had a slightly larger engine and a few other, I think, very small creature comforts for a manual mill. I could have gone hydraulic, but it would have cost twice as much, and for the amount of sawmilling that I'm actually doing, it just doesn't make any sense. But this is a pretty good mill. It's not in its final resting place. This is a temporary setup, and I will be building a sawmill shed and extending the length of the track. Here I'm just checking the square on the first post that I'm cutting, and it's perfect. Like I was really happy. This is a absolutely perfectly square post, and so hopefully they'll all go as smoothly. But the pine is so much easier to cut through, and it's certainly a reprieve for the sawmill after cutting so much oak. Right now, the sawmill is set up to cut 12.5-foot lengths, and it'll handle about a 24-inch diameter log if it's straight. I had several logs on here that were 18 or 19 inches, but because they weren't perfectly straight, I ran into, just sort of a limit, based on the shape of the tree. So I have to be careful about that. Cutting off the base and things like that help. But sometimes the tree just needs to be a little bit smaller if it's not perfectly straight. I'll mention a little bit more about the grapple later, but it's an enormous time saver when you're doing work like this. Here's the rest of the yard for what will ultimately just be my shop and the sawmill. So probably about where that lumber is stacked out right now is where the sawmill shed will go, and it'll be big enough for the shed and also probably to park my tractor under. And ultimately, I'll probably have a separate shop down here as well. The house that we're building is only about 60 or 80 yards away, back behind us, but there's a nice patch of trees in between this piece and the house itself. In the summer, it's hardly visible with all the leaves in. In the winter, you can kind of see through, but the back of the house and the views and the decks will all be facing in a different direction. So they are pretty separate. This is pretty tucked in, as it turns out, which is kind of nice. What I'm doing now is just cleaning up the yard. The slag pile by the sawmill had gotten pretty heavy. I'm just kind of pushing it off to the back of the hill there, and ultimately I'll burn it. I only added this grapple to the tractor about 3 months ago, but it's already proven invaluable. My productivity doing stuff like this has increased literally 3 or 4 times I have a bucket and some pallet forks, as you see, but you just can't move stuff like the slag pile or even brush without something like a grapple. Um, this one is from Everything Attachments. The only thing I don't like about it is the lower tines have what I would call a short underbite. It would be nice to have something that's scooped out just a little bit more on the bottom. I think they're trying to protect against the amount of weight you'd put on there. It does hold about 1,000 pounds. For the sawmill, I thought I'd mention I do use pine saw in my water mixture, and I had problems with the valve on the actual tank not being granular enough, and so somebody gave me a hint to put in a ball joint on the line itself, and that made an enormous difference. That way I can open the valve on the water tank, and the ball joint always stays exactly the same, so I can really regulate how much water is getting to the blade. As you saw before, there's a ton of leaves around here from fall and winter, and I just want to get all this cleaned up because here in eastern Kentucky, snake season's coming, and this is the last thing I want around the sawmill is a bunch of leaf piles where snakes are going to start digging into. There's some cavities under that sawmill too, the way it is. So cleaning it out like this every now and then just really helps. But I was able to process the 5 logs that I had. 3 of them are in really good shape and they'll be perfect for the build. 2 of them, one's a little bit shorter than what I need, and the other one was just the log was a little too thin to get a full 8x8 out of. So I just made a good cant out of it. And so here I am pulling out of the sawmill area, and then coming up. This path leads to the road. There's one to the right, and then this little, much smaller path to the left, just a little bit of a shortcut, gets me up on the road and then right back onto the driveway for the new house. So you can kind of see how close it is. The sawmill now is down and to the left of that view, and then here we come up on the site itself. Thanks. See you next time.